Section 6 of The Adventures of Bobby Coon by Thornton W. Burgess. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jude Somers. Section 6. Once more Bobby tries to sleep. Blacky the Crow discovers Bobby. And the surprise of two cousins. Chapter 15. Once more Bobby tries to sleep. Did you ever have the Sandman fill your eyes all full of sand, and then have to keep them open when there was no bed at hand? If you have had that happen, then you know exactly how Bobby Coon felt when he was obliged to crawl out of Prickly Porky's bed and go hunt for another. He was so very, very sleepy that he felt almost as if he could go to sleep standing right on his feet. This was because he had been up all night and awake most of the day before. Now he wished that instead of spending the night in fishing and playing about the Laughing Brook, he had hunted for a house. To be sleepy and not able to sleep makes Bobby cross, just as it does most folks. So, as he hurried away from the neighborhood of Prickly Porky and his 1,000 little spears, he was in a bad temper. Of course, he knew it was his own fault that he was in such a fix, but this didn't make him feel a bit better. In fact, it made him feel worse. It usually is that way. So he grumbled to himself as he went along. He didn't know where he was going. He was too cross and sleepy and upset to do any thinking. So he went along aimlessly, looking for a place where he might sleep undisturbed. At last he came to a tall stump, a great big old stump that had stood in the Green Forest for years and years. Bobby climbed to the top of it. It was hollow, just as he had hoped. Indeed, it was just a shell. Looking down, Bobby saw with a great deal of satisfaction that the bottom was covered with a great mass of rotted wood. It would make a very comfortable bed. Moreover, it was plain that no one else was using it. Bobby sighed with satisfaction. It was just the place for a good long nap. He could sleep there all day in perfect comfort. It wouldn't do for a home, because the top was open to the sky, and on a rainy day the inside of that stump would soon be a very wet place indeed. But for a nice long nap on a pleasant day, it would be hard to beat. Bobby sighed again, looked all about to make sure that no one was watching him, and then climbed down inside. "I guess," muttered Bobby, as he curled up on the bed of rotted wood, which is sometimes called punk, "that at last I shall be allowed to sleep in peace. I never was more sleepy in all my life." He yawned 2 or 3 times, changed his position for greater comfort, closed his eyes, and in a twinkling was asleep. Now, though he thought no one saw him go into that old stump, someone did. That someone was Peter Rabbit. Peter had followed Bobby just out of curiosity. He had hidden behind trees so as to keep out of Bobby's sight. So he had seen Bobby climb the stump and disappear inside. "I guess," said Peter, "that this time he will sleep in peace. No one is likely to find him there unless it should be that Sammy Jay or Blacky the Crow happens to fly over and so discover him. They wouldn't give him a bit of peace if they should. Hello, there's Blacky the Crow now, and he seems to be coming this way. I think I will hang around a while longer." Chapter 16. Blacky the Crow discovers Bobby. Blacky the Crow is sharp of eye. He dearly loves to peek and pry. I must confess, alas, alack, Blacky the Crow's an imp in black. It is true, I am sorry to say, that Blacky the Crow never is happier than when he is teasing someone and making them uncomfortable. He is an imp of mischief, is Blacky. Whatever business he has on hand, he goes about it with one eye open for a chance to have fun at the expense of someone else. And there is little that those sharp eyes of his miss. He sees all that there is to see. Yes, sir, you may trust Blacky for that. It was just the hard luck of Bobby Coon that no sooner was he asleep in that hollow stump in the Green Forest than along came Blacky the Crow, flying just above the tree tops on his way to his nest, but as usual, watching sharply for what might be going on below. It just happened that he flew right over that stump, so that he could look right down inside. He saw Bobby Coon curled up there asleep. Yes, indeed, you may be sure he saw Bobby. Blacky checked himself in his flight and hovered for an instant right above that stump. Mischief fairly danced in his sharp eyes. Then he turned and silently flew down and alighted on the edge of the old stump. For a few minutes he sat there, looking down at Bobby Coon. All the time he was chuckling to himself. Then he flew to the top of a tree and began to call with all his might. He called. Almost right away he was answered, and presently from all directions came hurrying his friends and relatives, each one cawing at the top of his voice and asking Blacky what he had found. Blacky didn't tell them until the last one came hurrying up. Then he told them to go look in the old hollow stump. One after another they flew over it, looking down, and one after another they shouted with glee. Then as many as could find a place on the edge of the old stump did so, while the others sat about in trees or flew back and forth overhead. And all of them began to caw as hard as they ever could. Such a racket as they made! Of course, Bobby Coon couldn't sleep. Certainly not. No one could have slept through that racket. He opened his eyes and looked up. He saw a ring of black heads looking down at him, and Mischief fairly dancing in the sharp eyes, watching him. The instant it was known that he was awake, the noise redoubled. Bobby drew back his lips and snarled, and at that his tormentors fairly shrieked with glee. Then Blacky dropped a little stick down on Bobby. Another crow did the same thing. Bobby scrambled to his feet and started to climb up. His tormentors took to the air and screamed louder than ever. Bobby stopped. What was the use of going up where they could get at him? They would pull his fur and make him most uncomfortable, and he knew he couldn't catch one of them to save him. He backed down and sat glaring up at them and telling them what dreadful things he would do if he were ever to catch one of them. This delighted Blacky and his friends more than ever. They certainly were having great fun. Finally, Bobby did the wisest thing possible. He once more curled up and took no notice at all of the black imps. Of course, he couldn't go to sleep with such a racket going on, but he pretended to sleep. Now you know there is no fun in trying to tease one who won't show he is teased. After a while, Blacky and his friends got tired of screaming. They had had their fun, and one by one they flew about their business, until at last the Green Forest was as still could be. Bobby sighed thankfully, and once more fell asleep. Chapter 17. The Surprise of Two Cousins. Peter Rabbit should have been back home in the dear Old Briar-patch long ago. He knew that Mrs. Peter was worrying. She always worries when Peter overstays. But Peter was not giving much thought to Mrs. Peter. In fact, I am afraid he was not giving any thought to her. You see, he was way too full of curiosity about Bobby Coon and what might happen to him. He had been sorry for Bobby in a way, yet it had seemed like a great joke that anyone as sleepy as Bobby was shouldn't be able to sleep. So I am afraid Peter rather enjoyed the excitement. When finally Blacky and his friends grew tired and went about their business, Peter began to think about getting back to the dear Old Briar-patch. "I guess Bobby will sleep in peace now," thought Peter. "I can't think of anything more that possibly can happen to disturb him. Poor Bobby, he has had a hard time getting that nap." Still, Peter hung around. He didn't know just why, but he had a feeling that he might miss something if he left. And you know, Peter never could forgive himself if he missed anything worth seeing. So he hung around for some time after Blacky and his friends had gone about their business. At last he had just about made up his mind that he would better be starting for home when he was startled by the snapping of a little twig. Peeping out from behind a big tree, Peter stared towards the place from which the sound had come. In a moment he saw a big black form. "Buster Bear!" gasped Peter. "This is the first time I have seen him this spring. My, how thin he is!" Peter looked about to make sure that the way was clear for a hasty run if it should be necessary, and then held his breath as Buster drew near. Buster kept stopping to look and listen and sniff the air, and suddenly Peter understood. "He heard those noisy crows, and he has come to see what it was all about," thought Peter, which was exactly the case. Buster knew that it was just about this place that Blacky and his friends had been making such a racket, and his greedy little eyes searched everywhere for some sign of what had been going on. But there was nothing to be seen but a black feather at the foot of a tall old stump. By this, Buster knew for sure he had found the place where Blacky and his friends had been, but there was nothing to tell him why they had been there. Buster sat up and blinked thoughtfully. Then, as he looked at the old stump, his eyes brightened. "I don't know what all that fuss was about," he muttered, "and I guess I never will know, but I'm glad I came just the same. That old stump looks to me to be rotten and hollow. I have found ant nests in many an old stump like that, and beetles and grubs. I'll just see what this one contains." Buster walked over to the old stump, hooked his great claws into a crack, and pulled with all his might. Peter Rabbit, watching, held his breath with excitement. There was a sharp cracking noise, and then the whole side of that old stump gave way so suddenly that Buster Bear fell over backwards. As he did so, Bobby Coon rolled out, half awake and frightened almost out of his wits. It is hard to say which was the most surprised of the two cousins, Buster Bear or Bobby Coon. End of section 6.